My relevant philosophical expertise is in theories of manipulation and the ethics of interpersonal influence. So what I want to do today is I want to present to you some work in progress. This is very much a work in progress thing where what I'm trying to do is incorporate serious thinking about expertise and about higher levels of cooperative and competitive joint activity between people. So I think in a lot of the literature that theorizes about manipulation tends to overlook this stuff. And it's my hope that we can enrich our work here in this way. So that's the sort of new approach that I am mentioning here. And I say new sort of vis-a-vis the extant work on theories of manipulation. The rough idea that I want to try to spell out for you today, and then I'm hoping that you'll be able to help me work up a bit, is that manipulativeness is a distinctive way of failing to be cooperative. And that's the gist of the talk. I'm going to tell you what that means. And then you're going to tell me what you think. So let me sort of set up the background practical concern that's sort of guiding why my theory takes the trajectory it does. And this is, of course, it's the most platitudinous of platitudes, right? We regularly must rely on one another to help us do the right things for the right reasons, right? We must rely on one another to get things right. That's just supposed to be a platitude. But it raises a concern, and this is the concern where the practical content comes in. Because we must rely on others to help us get things right, we should be concerned that some of those people will not be reliable. Let me point out one way in which someone might be unreliable in the way that matters here, right? They might be manipulative in their interactions with us. So when I'm thinking about manipulative here, I'm thinking about a broader pattern of interaction, a particular way of interacting with somebody over time and across situations, right? So just to give you a little bit more detail here, typically when people theorize about manipulation, they're trying to give you a concept that's so broad that it can cover sort of one-off interactions between people. And they hardly even count as interactions, really, if they're considered in isolation, right? So it can be just a sort of particular instance in which I influence you, for example, in a way that we would want to call manipulation. So you might have a doctor, for example, who is the picture of a responsible, careful doctor, but just this one time, I present to you the survival rates of surgery in just such a way that you're more likely to consent. Right? So that would be manipulation. But I'm interested I don't want to look at isolated cases like that, right? I want to look at broader patterns of interaction that make someone unreliable in a particular way. So in particular, the main contrast here is they're not unreliable in the sense that can just be explained by mere incompetence, right? In fact, someone can, of course, be manipulative while being perfectly competent. They're probably even better at being manipulative when they're competent. And it's a particular kind of unreliability that is plausibly pro tanto wrong, also in the way that incompetence usually isn't. So that's sort of a rough job description of the thing that I'm going to try to spell out for you today. And here's sort of the key contrast that I'll be using, sort of as theoretical leverage. The idea is that cooperative deliberation, or you can just think about this as deciding together about what to do, that's a paradigmatic case of helping someone do the right thing for the right reasons. It's the paradigmatic case of helping someone get things right. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but when we decide together, right, we're trying to settle on the action that is right by drawing on every participant's practical point of view, right? So the sort of reliance that we find ourselves in is supposed to be met by drawing on everyone's practical point of view. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the dynamics of this later, because there's something pretty interesting that falls out of my account. But the main thing you need to understand right now is that my primary contrast class is deciding together or cooperative deliberation. All right, so this, of course, raises sort of two sort of characteristically philosophical questions. The first is, what is this manipulativeness exactly? And the other one, of course, is what is cooperation and deliberation? Now, I've already told you a little bit about my background and my training, so I'm going to focus on the first of these questions. I'm going to give you a little bit more theory that I'm mostly just borrowing from Andrea Westland about deciding together, but it's a relatively thin conception. But I think even that sort of thin conception is going to help us understand better what manipulative treatment of one another looks like, right? And now, of course, in this case, I expect actually for there to be a lot of people in the audience who know a lot more about cooperation than I do. So that's a great opportunity for me to learn from you. So let's dive into manipulativeness. Let me start by drawing on work that already exists on manipulation, bearing in mind that earlier I said manipulation, right, is such a broad category that it covers the sorts of things I'm not interested in. But still, it's going to be illuminating. So I'm going to show you why. So we're going to start and look a little bit about theories of manipulation. So I endorse what I will call the basic idea about manipulation. And this one is very common. So the basic idea about manipulation is that manipulation is intentionally leading someone astray. And if it helps, the de dicto here is actually going to be important. Now, leading someone astray here is supposed to be a very capacious notion, right? It's not just about deception and beliefs, right? It's broader than that. You can lead someone astray in their feelings, in their desires, in their plans, in their beliefs. And this is really important, it might not be the action, belief, or emotion that's incorrect, but rather you might lead them to do that thing, believe that thing, feel that thing for bad reasons. That's a different way to lead someone astray. And either one is supposed to fall under ways to manipulate people. So this is a pretty prominent view in the literature. There's a few major articles pointing you to that. And I think it's basically right. However, there is a prominent challenge to this basic idea that manipulation is intentionally leading someone astray. And it's sort of independently arrived at. This criticism has been independently arrived at, more or less, by Moti Goren and Michael Klink. And so they think the basic idea is wrong, okay? Because they think that there are cases of manipulation where you can manipulate someone just by intentionally getting them to do what, by your lights, is absolutely the right thing to do, and all only for good reasons. They think that even in those cases, you're manipulating someone when you just sort of give them things that you take to be perfectly good reasons to do something right. And they think that the reason for this is that you could be doing this giving of reasons business without really caring, right, that these are good reasons I'm giving you. So the way that they often put it is something like, a manipulator doesn't care so much about the quality of the reasons, the normative quality of the reasons, but rather they care about the causal efficacy of giving them to you, right? So here's a sort of example, the kind of example that's going to motivate their case, right? So suppose that I'm a sleazy car salesman, right? Fill that in with whatever content you want, right? I'm ready to do all the tricks in the book to get you to buy a car so that I can make my cut, right? I'm ready to manipulate you. You walk in the door, you tell me what you need, you tell me what your budget is, and oh, wouldn't you know it, it turns out I have the perfect car for you. Really, I really have the perfect car for you, right? This is not the skeezy car salesman talking. This is Jared, the philosopher, right? There really is perfectly fine car over here. It's the right price, the right features, and it gives the salesman a great cut. So though I am a skeezy car salesman who's ready to manipulate you, in this case, I just have to give you the perfectly good reasons, and then you give me what I want, right? And they want to say that's a case of manipulation. Now, intuitively, I think that's not at all clear, right? I think it's not a case of manipulation. But that part's not important. But the point is to illustrate this is a case where the car salesman doesn't care about the normative quality of the reasons. They're just a handy tool to get you to buy the car, right? So they try to spell out this difference in terms of responsive to normative reasons, and if you like, qua-normative reasons, right? Rather than normative reasons as potential levers in the psychology of their victims, right? And you can summarize it this way. So I want to suggest that they say that manipulation constitutively violates a particular norm. They characterize manipulation as a norm violation, so this is all fine, right? And just call the norm the GK norm for now, for Gore and Klink. And the norm is see to it that when you're influencing another person, you are responsive to the normative reasons that bear on their situation. And the idea is supposed to be that manipulators constitutively violate this norm, right? Whereas something like, a rational persuader, someone who's engaged in rational persuasion with you, does not. They adhere to the norm. So the car salesman example, this is a case where we can wrangle over the intuitions back and forth all that we want. But I don't really want to do that because I think that there's a more compelling way to challenge their theory. So I think their theory is wrong, but I think there's a really important insight in it, right? So first I'm going to tell you why I think it's wrong, and then we'll pull out the insight. And I think that their view can be challenged just by utterly ordinary cases of different kinds of experts working together, right? So this is kind of a long-winded example, But the important thing to recognize, there's nothing special here, there's nothing tricky going on in this case. This is just two experts, different kinds of experts, and they're working together on a project. That's all this is, right? So I presented in terms of you're making an indie movie. One of the experts is Medina the metalsmith, and she's responsible for actually making the prop weapons for the fantasy movie. And Penny, the prop manager, of course, is the one who has the shooting script, she has the budget, she has the schedule, right? And she's the one trying to figure out, okay, how many different swords can we afford to buy? Will they get there in time? How many shields and spears and so on can we afford to buy? Will they get there in time? And Medina is, of course, the one responsible for making them. You know, the whole point of collaborating with different kinds of experts is because each expert has a handle on a sort of different set of the normatively relevant considerations, right? Medina knows what she can produce and how quickly, and how many person hours she needs to produce them, right? Penny knows when she needs things by and what she can afford, and so on and so forth. And each one of them is simply relying on the other one to be competent, right? With sort of the reasons that they have a handle on. But this, I suggest, actually shows why Gorin and Klink's theory is wrong. Because neither expert is responsive to the other's reasons in the sense that's required by the norm. And here it's important to appreciate that responsive to normative reasons, remember, it's quite demanding, right? It can't just be like with the salesman, right, who gave reasons over because they were convenient, right? And here's more or less what the responsiveness comes to. So first of all, obviously, you have to be motivated by that reason, right? That consideration has to motivate you into action. But the motivation needs to be based on an appreciation of the normative force of the reason. That's supposed to be the difference between using a normative reason as if it were a causal lever, right? And using it as a normative reason. But the whole point, and you see where this is coming from, right? Neither expert is really in a position to do that. They're not in a position to appreciate the normative reasons that the other one is managing, right? And this I've already said. This is what they're really doing. They're relying on each other to be competent for the things that they're managing. So the point here is that neither expert is actually in a position to adhere to this norm, right? But violating this norm is supposed to be constitutive of manipulation. But obviously, these two experts aren't manipulating each other. So I don't think it works as a theory of manipulation, but I think there is an important insight here. And the insight is, go back to the main where we had, right? We must rely on other people pervasively, right, to get things right. And that makes us, we should be concerned rather that those people might not be reliable. Now, I do think that what addresses that worry is something like what Gorin and Klink are talking about. It does seem to matter whether somebody is careless in their interactions with us, right, vis-a-vis normative reasons. And so we can flesh it out a little bit more like this. We can say people who engage in manipulative interaction with us are not reliable when it comes to helping us do the right things for the right reasons. That's the original idea. Now we're giving it more content. This is because they're careless vis-a-vis normative reasons. Now, we've already seen that the GK norm doesn't capture the carelessness in question, right? So the obvious follow-up question is, okay, but what does careless here actually mean? What's the right way to think about carelessness of the sort that makes people unreliable? And so that's why I want to bring back in deciding together, or cooperative deliberation, because it's going to be a useful foil because we can treat it as a case in which you are being careful with normative reasons. So we look at cooperation, that'll give us a picture of carefulness. And then we say that, and then we can, if you like, characterize manipulativeness as a failure to do that. So let's look a little bit more carefully at cooperation and deciding together. So here I'm just going to draw, I'm mainly going to just draw on Andrea Weston's work, which is itself a kind of elaboration. No, not an elaboration, it's an extension. It's a development from sort of Michael Bratman's earlier work on shared deliberation. And her idea is that deciding together is something like this. It's endeavoring to arrive together at a plan, and this is the important bit, that is appropriately shaped by each participant's practical point of view. So here's a sort of kind of minimal characterization that I'm willing to endorse. This is slightly different from Westland's, and we can talk about why I'm departing from hers here, if you like, if you're interested in these details. But the idea is something like, you know, when you're actually endeavoring to arrive together at such a plan, here's at least part of what you're doing, right? You are offering proposals for what the plan could look like, and you are looking out for defeaters to that proposal, especially those that your deliberative partners attest to, right? The ones that they point out and bring up. And of course, their attestations of whether or not this is a good plan or a bad plan are guiding your endorsement or your rejection of the proposals. Again, this isn't supposed to be particularly controversial. I'm just describing something we're all intimately familiar with. But can you give the idea of deciding together much more definitive content? And I also follow N.J. Westland here. I think it's not actually that easy to do. Because I think that when you actually want to know what it is to decide together in this way, your best bet is actually just to put two people on a job and see what they do. And then maybe look at it afterwards if you like. Because the details of deciding together, they really depend on how the dialogical process unfolds between them, right, over time. And so here's what I want to say about this. I want to say then that if that's what you're really concerned with doing, if you're really concerned with arriving at such a plan, then your concern or your care has this kind of distinctly aspirational character, right? What you are endeavoring to do in deciding together with somebody else about some particular problem, it can't be given much content in advance. And I just want to remind you, of course, that the idea is going to be there's a corresponding carelessness. Remember, that's supposed to be characteristic of manipulativeness. And it's lacking this kind of aspiration. Okay, but so this aspirational character here, right, when you're deciding together with someone, it kind of puts you in a funny position, right? So if you're genuinely trying to decide together with somebody what to do, it's kind of ambiguous what you're really up to, right? Because you can't prove that you're endeavoring to arrive together upon a plan that is appropriately shaped by everyone's point of view until you've done it, right? That's the proof, is the plan. So someone who's genuinely cooperating can never really quite prove that they're cooperating. But they can do sort of ordinary, familiar gestures, body language, sort of ways of talking and working with you that are supposed to signal to you that they are cooperating, right? They have kind of an expressive function saying, this is what I really care about doing. Please believe me. But I think that it's this kind of ambiguous position of a genuine cooperator that a manipulative person can exploit. Because they can exploit the expressive function of this kind of thing. So I can say, hey, what do you think about this proposal? Does that look good? What do you think about that, right? Okay, I understand the problem, Well, how about this one, right? A manipulator can make all the gesticulations, they can use the body language, the verbal cues of a cooperator without caring. You lead someone astray vis-a-vis what you're actually concerned with doing. You're leading them astray into thinking something like, this person is actually trying to decide with me. But the manipulator is not. The manipulator has a plan of their own. What they're really interested in doing is getting you to adopt their plan. And so this is what it is to be covertly non-cooperative. So I want to say then that we kind of done this out of order, but I want to say that the carelessness that's exhibited in manipulative interaction is lacking that aspiration to arrive together at a plan that's appropriately formed by all the participants' point of view. And then I want to say that the connection to manipulation, remember the leading astray bit, has to do with the fact that you're leading them astray with respect to what you care about, right? You make them think you do care about arriving at such a plan when you don't. And that's manipulative. That's what makes what you're doing manipulative. Okay, but so now go back to the main problem that we started with, right? Does this actually explain why we should not rely on manipulative people to help us do the right thing for the right reasons? Think about it this way, right? I might be a manipulative person who's pretending to cooperate with you, right, in making a plan. But if you think that I'm actually something like the perfect picture of the paternalistic manipulator, right, I really do actually know the best thing for you to do, then manipulating you or not, you're still going to land in the right plan for you, right? So you might be concerned, you might be thinking, okay, so the guy's manipulating you, but it's not really unreliable. You still landed in the right place at the end. So we need to make an extra assumption. So remember the platitude at the beginning, we must rely on one another to get things right. This is pervasive, it's a general phenomenon, and it's also pervasively symmetric. Remember, of course, that when you rely on experts, you know things they don't know, right? So think about a doctor who's dispensing you medical advice. There's a lot of other kinds of practical considerations that you have to take into account that are not his domain of expertise, like your family obligations, or anything else that matters to you besides your health. So there's a kind of symmetric dependence as the norm. And provided the symmetric dependence is in place, then being manipulative in this way is going to make is going to make the manipulator unreliable, right? So just as we must rely on others to help us do the right thing, get things right, they are reciprocally reliant insofar as our practical point of view also matters. So I think there's a kind of interesting mutuality to the dynamic that I want to talk about, right? So the interesting implication that I want to emphasize here is that manipulative unreliability, right? It doesn't inhere just in the fact that someone's manipulating you, but at least in part in the fact that they're not interested in taking your practical point of view seriously. The mutuality is kind of this funny thing. I rely on you, right? And that makes it matter to me if you're reliable, right? Or let me say, it matters to me whether or not you are reliable. But you are unreliable in part because you're relying on me. Yeah, so let me just wrap up real quick, give you the main points. So manipulative people of the sort I'm interested in characterizing, they're careless in the sense that they do not aspire to decide together with those they influence, which is to say that they're not endeavoring to arrive at a plan appropriately shaped by everyone's point of view. And this carelessness is manipulative when and because it is coupled with leading others astray, right, about what you are up to, right? You mislead them into thinking you are concerned with deciding with them when you're not. And then finally, this manipulativeness renders people unreliable insofar as, and in part because, other people's practical points of view, the people we are manipulating, right, their practical point of view also matters to what they should do.